What if a tiny swampy island with no water, no oil, and no natural resources became one of the richest and busiest ports on planet Earth? It sounds impossible, almost like a fairy tale, but it really happened, and the story behind it is one of the greatest comeback stories in human history. Singapore was once a mosquito-filled fishing village surrounded by mangrove swamps. Nobody believed it had a future. Yet today it stands as a global trading powerhouse, home to gleaming skyscrapers, a world-class airport, and a port that moves more cargo than almost anywhere else on Earth. How did this happen? How did a nation smaller than most cities rise above giants like China, the United States, and Europe to become a symbol of success? Today we are going to break down exactly how Singapore pulled off this incredible transformation, point by point, so buckle up because this story will genuinely inspire you. Point 1. A swampy island with almost nothing going for it. Before Singapore became famous, it was mostly swampland, thick jungle, and small fishing communities scattered along the coast. The soil was poor, fresh water was scarce, and the climate was hot and humid all year round. There were no valuable minerals underground, no oil reserves, and no large farmland to grow crops. In the early 1800s, the island was seen by many as a backwater with little value. When the British trader Stamford Raffles arrived in 1819, he saw something others missed. He noticed the island's location along a narrow strait that connected the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea. This narrow strip of water, later known as the Strait of Malacca, was one of the busiest shipping routes in the world. Raffles believed that if a port were built here, ships traveling between India, China, and Europe would have a natural stopping point. He convinced the British East India Company to establish a trading post on the island. This decision, made on a swampy patch of land that nobody wanted, would eventually change the course of history and turn Singapore into a name known across the entire globe. Point 2. The power of location, location, location. Geography is often called destiny, and nowhere is that more true than in Singapore. The island sits directly on the Strait of Malacca, the shortest sea route between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Almost every ship traveling from Europe or the Middle East to China, Japan, or Korea has to pass through this narrow channel. Think of it like a busy highway toll booth where nearly all traffic must pass through one point. Singapore positioned itself exactly at that toll booth. Instead of just letting ships pass by, Singapore built facilities so that vessels would want to stop, refuel, resupply, and trade. Over time, this simple geographic advantage became the foundation of the entire economy. While other nations relied on farmland or mining for wealth, Singapore relied on its position on the map. Leaders understood early on that if they could not compete with size, they could compete with strategy. By turning their limited land into the most efficient stopping point in the region, they transformed a natural bottleneck into an economic goldmine that would benefit the nation for centuries to come. Point 3. Independence and a terrifying start. In 1965, Singapore was suddenly forced to become an independent nation after being expelled from Malaysia. This was not a joyful celebration. It was closer to a nightmare. The country had no natural resources, almost no trained workforce, high unemployment, and constant tension with its much larger neighbors. Fresh water even had to be imported from Malaysia, which meant Singapore's very survival depended on another country's goodwill. Many experts at the time predicted that Singapore would collapse within a few years. There were housing shortages, ethnic tensions, and a fragile economy that could barely support its own population. Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew later admitted that he cried on the day of independence, not out of joy, but out of fear for what lay ahead. Instead of giving in to despair, the government made a bold decision. They would turn Singapore's greatest weakness, its lack of resources, into a reason to build something entirely new. They focused on what they could control: human talent, trade, and global connections, setting the stage for one of the most remarkable economic turnarounds the world has ever witnessed. Point 4. A leader with an unshakable vision. Every incredible transformation needs a driving force, and for Singapore that force was Lee Kuan Yew. As the nation's first prime minister, he understood that Singapore could not survive by playing small. He believed that if the country wanted to succeed, it had to become indispensable to the rest of the world. His vision was simple but powerful: turn Singapore into a place so efficient, so clean, and so trustworthy that international businesses would have no choice but to invest there. He pushed for strict laws, disciplined governance, and long-term planning instead of short-term politics. While many nations focused on quick wins, Lee Kuan Yew focused decades ahead. He invested heavily in education, believing that human capital was Singapore's true natural resource. He also prioritized cleanliness and order, famously banning chewing gum and enforcing strict fines for littering, because he understood that global investors wanted stability and predictability. His leadership style was sometimes criticized as strict, even authoritarian, but the results were undeniable. Under his guidance, Singapore transformed from a struggling former colony into a global model of efficient governance and economic planning that other nations still study today. Point 5. Turning the ocean into land. One of the most jaw-dropping parts of Singapore's story is how it physically expanded its own size. Since the island had very little land to begin with, engineers began a massive project called land reclamation. This process involves taking soil, sand, and rock from other locations and using it to build new land directly into the ocean. Since gaining independence, Singapore has increased its total land area by roughly 25%, which in words means the country grew by about 1/4 of its original size, almost entirely through reclaimed land. This new land was not just random space, it was strategically used to build ports, airports, and industrial zones. Areas that were once open sea are now home to some of the busiest container terminals on the planet. This willingness to physically reshape geography shows just how determined Singapore was to overcome its natural limitations. While other nations waited for opportunities to come to them, Singapore quite literally built new ground beneath its feet to create those opportunities. It is one of the most extreme examples in the world of a country refusing to accept the limits of its own map. Point 6. Rolling out the red carpet for global business. Singapore understood early on that in order to attract international trade, it needed to make doing business as smooth and appealing as possible. The government introduced low corporate taxes, simplified regulations, and strong legal protections for foreign investors. Unlike many nations where bureaucracy could take months to navigate, Singapore streamlined its system so that businesses could set up operations quickly and confidently. This created an environment where multinational corporations felt safe parking their regional headquarters on the island. English was adopted as a primary language for business and education, which made international communication effortless for global companies. The government also cracked down heavily on corruption, creating one of the most transparent and trustworthy business environments in all of Asia. Investors did not have to worry about bribery, unclear laws, or political instability. This reputation for honesty and efficiency became just as valuable as its physical port location. Businesses began to see Singapore not just as a stopping point for ships, but as a secure base for banking, trade, and long-term investment, further fueling its rapid economic rise on the world stage. Point 7. Mastering the art of container shipping. As global trade evolved, the way cargo was shipped around the world also transformed, and Singapore adapted faster than almost anyone else. The introduction of standardized shipping containers revolutionized international trade because goods could now be packed, transported, and unloaded far more efficiently than traditional loose cargo methods. Singapore quickly invested in modern port infrastructure designed specifically for this new container-based system. The Port of Singapore Authority built massive terminals with advanced cranes, automated tracking systems, and deep water berths capable of handling enormous cargo ships. This allowed Singapore to process incoming and outgoing shipments at incredible speed, drastically reducing waiting times for vessels. Ships that might spend days waiting at other ports could load and unload within hours in Singapore. This efficiency created a snowball effect, as more shipping companies chose Singapore specifically because of how fast and reliable its operations were. Over time, the port grew to become one of the busiest transshipment hubs in the entire world, connecting goods traveling between hundreds of countries. Speed, precision, and constant innovation became the beating heart of Singapore's economic engine. Point 8. Building world-class infrastructure from scratch. Beyond just the port itself, Singapore invested heavily in becoming a fully connected global hub. This meant constructing an incredible airport, extensive road networks, and reliable public transportation systems, all designed with efficiency and cleanliness in mind. Changi Airport became renowned worldwide, often ranked among the very best airports on the planet, offering seamless connections for both cargo and passengers. This mattered because modern trade is not just about ships, it is also about air freight, business travel, and logistics networks working together in harmony. Singapore made sure that its infrastructure supported every part of the supply chain, from the moment goods left a factory overseas to the moment they reached their final destination. The government continuously reinvested profits from trade back into infrastructure upgrades, ensuring the systems never became outdated. This forward-thinking approach meant that as global trade demands grew larger and more complex, Singapore's infrastructure was always ready to handle it. While many countries struggled with aging or inefficient systems, Singapore treated infrastructure as a living investment that needed constant attention, keeping it years ahead of its competitors. Point 9. Zero tolerance for corruption and instability. Trust is one of the most valuable currencies in international trade, and Singapore built an enormous reserve of it. The government implemented extremely strict anti-corruption laws and enforced them with real consequences, regardless of a person's status or position. This created a business culture where deals were made based on merit and legality rather than bribery or hidden favors. Companies from around the world felt confident investing in Singapore because they knew contracts would be honored and disputes would be handled fairly through a strong legal system. Political stability also played a massive role. While neighboring regions sometimes experienced turmoil or unpredictable leadership changes, Singapore maintained a consistent and steady government approach for decades. This predictability allowed businesses to make long-term plans without fear of sudden disruption. Investors do not just look for opportunity, they look for safety, and Singapore delivered both. This reputation for honesty and stability became a powerful magnet, drawing banks, shipping companies, and corporations that wanted a secure base of operations in Asia, further reinforcing the island's status as a trusted global business center. Point 10. From swamp to the world's richest port. All of these efforts combined to create something extraordinary. Today, Singapore's port is recognized as one of the busiest and most efficient in the entire world, handling an enormous volume of global shipping traffic every single year. The nation transformed from a struggling former colony with almost no resources into one of the wealthiest countries on earth, measured by income per person. Skyscrapers now rise where swamps once stood, and the same waters that once surrounded a quiet fishing village are now filled with massive cargo ships from every corner of the globe. Singapore's success did not come from luck or natural resources, it came from strategy, discipline, and an absolute refusal to accept limitations. The country turned a geographic advantage into a global empire of trade, finance, and logistics. It proves that a nation's greatness is not determined by its size or its natural wealth, but by the vision and determination of its people and leaders. Singapore stands today as living proof that even the most unlikely beginnings can lead to the most remarkable success stories in modern history. And that is the incredible true story of how a small, swampy, resource-poor island transformed itself into one of the richest and most powerful ports on the entire planet. From humble fishing villages to towering skyscrapers, from muddy mangroves to some of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, Singapore proves that with the right vision, discipline, and relentless determination, anything is possible. It is one of the most powerful reminders in modern history that limitations do not have to define your future. If this story inspired you even a little bit, then please hit that like button right now. It truly helps this channel grow. Drop a comment below and tell me which point surprised you the most. I read every single one and love hearing your thoughts. And if you have not already, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another incredible story like this one. There are so many more amazing journeys just like Singapore's waiting to be told, and I promise you do not want to miss them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the very next video.